Yes. So it's all up to me. There you go. Well, um, I, I always enjoy the Old Testament Hebrew. I didn't study that this time because there was too much in Luke and Colossians that was exciting to look at. However, let's at least take a look at that. Let's read it. Genesis 18. Does anybody like to read in here? Okay, go for it.
Then the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very great, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom. But Abraham still stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not smart for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing. Put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just, and Lord? I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abraham answered and said, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Again he spoke to him and said, suppose 40 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 40 I will not do it. Then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it, but find 30 there. He said, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 20 I will not destroy it. Then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 10 I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way. When he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place.
Okay. Any thoughts about that you're... Again, that was for those that are online, Genesis 18, 20 to 33.
Abraham was really testing God.
Yeah. Oops, something just dropped. Okay. AC. All right. Yeah, he was testing God. Well, testing is, when you say testing, what do you mean?
Trying his patience.
Yeah, trying his patience. As in, as opposed to testing that would be, quizzing.
Yes.
Yeah, pushing the boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to save the city
Mm-hmm.
in his own way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes wasn't good enough.
That, yeah, like the child in that case would be pushing the boundaries. And in that case, a child is looking to find out where the boundaries are. And the father is illuminating where the boundaries are by saying no to the request. So that would be a different kind of testing. In this case, well, I suppose Abraham would be trying to find the boundaries. The child looking for boundaries for a different reason. Yeah.
I was just referring to the child pestering the parent.
Yeah.
Over and over because the answer wasn't good enough.
Yeah, pestering the parent. Keep that in mind because that is pertinent to all of the readings here, especially the New Testament, gospel reading. The pestering or what we would call persistence in prayer. So that is a significant theme that is truly communicated in where Jesus is telling them, as essentially it would be, I like to call it, bother the Father. Definitely you have permission to bother the Father, and here's how to do it. He gives the Lord's Prayer there. So that's an interesting way of looking at that testing with a twist, because in an earthly circumstance or illustration, like the child would be testing the Father, but the Father wouldn't necessarily say, yeah, keep testing me on that. Keep pleading, keep persisting in your pleading. The Father would typically not say that. However, if the parent were to address the child's concern and it were a concern for safety, then that father would say, yeah, keep pushing me. Like I've told my sons, if you don't get me on the phone during the middle of the night and you're out somewhere and you're stuck, my phone typically, I may not hear it. You've got to keep calling me, and then eventually I'll hear it. So that's a different kind of testing for a different reason, which would be related to the Luke 11. So that's interesting. Yeah, persistence. Anything else from Genesis there? For all we know, Abraham was just really saying, hey, my brother Lot is out there. And I know you're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, but I don't really want Lot destroyed and his family. That's really what he's asking for. So we don't have any indication in the text that it's actually for any other reason. He's pleading for the sake of his brother. He's pleading for mercy, which is a significant theme for the readings today. Now here's a quiz for you. You know where Sodom and Gomorrah is at in the world? You probably know. Yeah, Iraq. Yeah. Somewhere out there. Baghdad is Babylon. So I get a lot of Facebook feeds from archaeological stuff, and it's interesting to kind of see because there's so much that's being dug up nowadays that is just we just didn't know before. So we see a tremendous amount of the cities that were destroyed back in those days being dug up, and so you see a number of those things. I don't know about Sodom and Gomorrah. I didn't look that up, but some of those places were just destroyed beyond. I mean, and they're piled on. There's so much stuff that's just piled on top, which is a weird thing for us because we don't do that. Around here, if we have a hill, we don't think, oh, I wonder what was built underneath that mound of rubble. Over there, that's a thing because they have thousands of years of history. Over here, we don't have as much of that civilization, history, at least documented. We still have a lot of things that we're discovering, but you know what LIDAR is? Instead of radar, LIDAR. LIDAR is a new scanning technology where they can look down from satellites and they can see just the contours of the Earth without the terrain, like the trees and all that sort of thing. You've ever seen this show, Draining the Oceans? Okay, that's what they use. They use LIDAR. And that's how they have this picture of the contours of the Earth without the water, without the trees and all that kind of thing. It's really fascinating. And they've really been able to show a lot of civilizations that we just can't see. In the Amazon rainforest, they see things like that. I just see these things on my feed all the time. But yeah, those are kind of a neat thing. But that's where the location is concerned.
Deep those artifacts are now compared to what you think it would be.
Yeah, that would be the one thing that we could dig up, if we needed to. But we don't do a lot of archaeological digging around here. And
be a lot of people hunting for Indian artifacts.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of
Oh, I bet.
So whenever you plow, you go out and you try to find them.
Mm-hmm.
And over years, the neighbor got a chisel plow, which would go way deeper than the moldboard plow.
Yeah.
And when he ran across the fields, he was pulling new ones up
Yeah.
from down deep.
My grandpa used to give them to me when I was a kid. Yeah, I have a few of them still in my little kid stash.
I have some too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on past Genesis. Maybe we'll come back to some references to it. You might know this already, and pastors in your past have probably talked about this, but the readings of the lectionary series are specifically chosen based upon the continuation of the story. Like in Genesis, you'll see the continuation of the story in the gospel reading, only it's fulfilled in Jesus. And then in the epistle reading, it's actually kind of backwards. The epistle reading actually, time frame-wise, would come after the gospel reading. But of course, we have the centerpiece of the theme for the day, the conclusion or the fulfillment in Jesus. So that's why the gospel reading is the big deal. But anyway, so that's one of the things I would encourage you to do, is to circle things on your bulletin where you see the themes, because this is very specifically intended for people to hear it that way. The researchers or the theologians that have picked these readings did that on purpose, for you as the congregation to hear that piece. It's information. It's what we call textual evidence. So the evidence is in the text. If it says this and then it fulfills it in the text, then you have reason to say, okay, well, there's something about that, So anyway, that's kind of how that all plays together. So in this case, why don't we do that? Let's read the gospel reading, and then we'll go back to Colossians. Anybody else besides Adam want to read? Luke 11, 1 to 13.
Now Jesus was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray, as John taught his disciples. And he said to them, when you pray, say, Father, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, for we ourselves forgive everyone who is indebted to us. And lead us not into temptation. And he said to them, which of you who has a friend will go to him at midnight and say to him, Friend, lend me 3 loaves, for a friend of mine has arrived on a journey and I have nothing to set before him. And he will answer from within, Do not bother me, the door is now shut, and my children are with me in bed. I cannot get up and give you anything. I tell you, though he will not get up and give him anything because he is his friend, yet because of his imprudence he will rise and give him whatever he needs. And I tell you, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened. What father among you, if his son asks for a fish, will instead of a fish give him a serpent? Or if he asks for an egg, will give him a scorpion? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will the Heavenly Father give the Holy Spirit to those who ask him?
Okay. So thinking of the Genesis reading, what's connected? How are these two readings connected, do you think? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So conversation is what you called it. How would you characterize that conversation? Mm. So in this case, there's specifically the relationship of that Jesus is referring to as a friend who is in need at night, kind of by surprise. So it wouldn't necessarily, there's no child here, but there's a similarity to the illustration of the child and the father, the supplier of the needs, or to the needs. The request. Yes. Yes. Yeah, intercessory prayer. So there is the interrogative conversation. It's the question. God, provide for us in this way. So that's the connecting theme. Let's go to Colossians for a second. And anybody want to read that?
Therefore, as you receive Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled in him, who is the head of all rule and authority. In him also you were circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith, in the powerful working of God, who raised him from the dead. And you, who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but our substance, but the substance belongs to Christ. Let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God.
Okay. What's the connection here?
God's giving us the gift of the Spirit.
That's the answer to the prayer. The pleading. God is giving the answer. Yeah. What was it like reading it in that order? Old Testament, Gospel, Epistle.
Just like a progression to get to the answer.
Yeah.
Start out with a bigger question,
Mm-hmm.
and it was partially answered, and it was fully answered at the end.
So this is the whole purpose behind the readings the way we have them. And chronologically, this is how the Bible works. So you have the Old Testament, what God does in creation, and then the promise. This is Genesis chapter 12 that comes to Abraham. Through you, all men will be blessed. All people on the earth will be blessed. And then we finally see it happening in the gospel reading with Jesus himself. And then we have the invention of the church. Jesus says, here you are. And so now it is a matter of how does that play out? How do we live that thing? So that's what the Apostle Paul and the other apostles are talking about. It says these are the details of how it works. So yeah, this is exactly the way it is planned out. You can do this every single Sunday. You can read it in that order, and this is exactly why this is. So the Old Testament points you to Christ. So there's a term that we use for that in our theological studies. We have a type of Christ, like, for instance, Jonah is a type of Christ. We see that connection in the scriptures as is described later on. Where does Jonah go? Well, through his journey, he goes into the fish. For how long? Yeah, 3 days. And then he comes out. It's resurrection. We have David, King David. He's a type of Christ. So there's this type thing. So it's a type of. So when we hear the Old Testament stories, they aren't just stories, they're real people. There are some people in their biblical studies, they will say that these are illustrations. They will deny that these were real incidents. The problem is that archaeology actually does describe that these things do happen. And there's not really a reason why we think that God can't do these things as we look at what Jesus did. What Jesus did is resurrection. It's weird stuff. He didn't just do it one time. He raised people from the dead. He raised Lazarus from the dead with eyewitnesses all around, and that was the one incident that put the leaders of the church over the top. Said, all right, we got to kill this guy. That was the one incident that it was more than just a magician. Now he's raising people from the dead. And what they do, they see everybody flocking and following Jesus. And that's the sin of those leaders. They're like, can't have that guy taking our positions. And they say that in John chapter 11. So that's the one incident that makes him so much different than any other magician, because even back in Egypt, the Pharaoh had his magicians. And so he just said, I've got my magicians that can do those things too. So it's not just that Jesus is magical. You know, we can do magical things. So Jesus is so way different. So that's kind of the way we see the Old Testament stories. They're Jesus types all throughout the whole thing. So, you know, that's kind of how it all plays out there. Other things we want to talk about. I want to stay on time here. When do we normally end Bible class? 45? Okay.
I saw a documentary about Sodom and Gomorrah, and scientists trying to say how it burned or how it got destroyed. This comet or asteroid hit the atmosphere and created this heat. And, but who sent the comet or the asteroid?
Right.
They didn't have an answer for that.
One thing I have seen is sulfur falling from the sky. So there was some guy that talks about finding these pieces of that out in that desert area. And, and those are things that would have been on fire. Yeah. Fire raining down from heaven. Yeah. So, there's some interesting pieces of, one guy I saw, he went, he's a billionaire or millionaire or something like that. Anyway, so he gets this wild hair idea that he's going to go find the mountain where Mount Sinai, where the Ten Commandments were given. And it's behind locked gates. So it's in Saudi Arabia, I think, which is all that whole Gulf area, peninsula. And he gets this other guy who's an archaeologist kind of a guy, does tons of research. And so you got the money and you got the knowledge. You put those two people together, and they buy plane tickets, and without anybody's permission, they go and they get permission to be in the country, but that's about as far as and then they just travel around like tourists kind of thing. And then they go to this one place where they're talking to locals, sheep herders and all this kind of stuff. They're wandering around. I don't know where they're feeding sheep in this desert, but whatever. And then they come up to this gate, and the guy says, we know where Mount Sinai is. The locals know where it is. It's there, and it's called blah, blah, blah. We all know about it. You can't go there, and they've got machine guns that they've guarded. So in the cover of night, these guys sneak through the fence, sure enough. And they go to the top of this mountain, and they find burnt like rock into obsidian, which is like, when you melt rock, it turns into like this glassy black rock, like glass. And there's nothing around that should do that on top of a mountain, but it's melted. And they connect all the different stories of the Bible. This is what it says, so we're going to go here. This is what it says, so we're going to go do this. So they're just going to follow the biblical narrative, and they find what they think is Mount Sinai, which what the locals say is it's what it is. So it is quite interesting that it's protected in that way. It's just funny stuff to me, why God did the way he did things. Other things we want to look at here. In the Colossians, we have this sort of repeated theme of the provisions. If this is the answer to prayer, what did he provide? Let's look at that and just kind of make a list here. Starting with 6, Colossians 2, 6 to 19. Okay. I'll tell you what, let's do it this way. I'll read it, and then you guys take note of it. Like you have a pencil or pen, you guys can just sort of underline things. And that way we can kind of track it, and you can name it after we get done with the reading. Therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord. Okay, so that's the big piece of the puzzle. Now we're going to have descriptions of it. So walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in faith. Just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. And you have been filled in him, who is the head of all rule and authority. In him you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God, who raised him from the dead. And you who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgive us all our trespasses, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food or drink, or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God. Okay. Why are you smiling? It is a lot. How many things did you underline or note? Mm-hmm. And that's exactly the way the Greek works here. A lot of this is a run-on sentence because in Greek there is no punctuation. The way that the Greek language works is that it says, okay, here's an adjective, and then it tells you the way that the word is constructed, what nouns are modified by this adjective. And then those nouns have this ending to it that tells you that it's modified specifically by this adjective. And that's how the Greek works. It doesn't need punctuation because it tells you in the structure of how the words are put together how to read it. So the punctuation is sort of built sort of at the end of each word. You know, it tells you what it's connected to. So that's interesting. Yes. It is very confusing because you have to memorize the endings. So like a noun has os, os, u, and on, or something like that. I mean, I have to look back again, but we have to memorize these endings. And so anytime you see an os, where it ends with an os, that tells you it's a nominative noun. So you've got nominative nouns, you've got accusative nouns, you've got all kinds of different. I should have taken English before I've taken the Greek because I'm like, what's an accusative again? But yeah, no kidding. So in any case, that's how this works. But it's correct. These different phrases, and that's why I like reading the ESV translation, because the NIV gets rid of the phrases like that, because the Greek is written in phrases like that. So, like, for instance, therefore, as you've received Christ Jesus the Lord, that's a phrase. So walk in him, that's a phrase. So in the NIV, it kind of smooths it out to make it sound like an English speaker. But our English doesn't work the same way. So that's why I like the ESV translation, because it kind of helps you get the feel of these phrases. So when you read it, you have to read it in phrases, not like the English, like a narrative storyline. It's not that way. These are all written in translation with the ESV, yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, it's not perfect. Like, for instance, when I was studying for today's service, there are a couple phrases in here that are unique. Let's see if I can find one of them. Okay, so this verse 8, see to it that no one takes you captive. That's one word in Greek. And it's only found here in the Bible. There's only one of these words that says, take you captive. So the translator, Dr. Oswald, was talking about, like, for instance, if you were to take a prize from, like, your conquest, like booty, something like that. That's kind of like what the translators understand that word to mean. But they take that word and they look at the rest of Greek of that time period, and they construct a meaning out of that word. Because if it's only found once in the Bible, you have to find the meaning of that word at that time period. So otherwise, if you take what the modern Greek says about that word, you might be importing meaning that isn't there back then. So that's why you have to look at it in that time frame. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. And then also this other word, by philosophy, this is the only place in the New Testament, in the Greek, that we find it in the Bible. Those two words are unique. So it's a challenge to the translator to figure out how to put it in the English. So they do their best. They do tons of study to find out. That's what we call exegetical study. to find out what does that word mean. How do we say it with an equal meaning here in our day and age? So like a person from Africa doesn't know necessarily what it means to, when you talk about the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world, they don't have lambs. And so one of my professors, when he would talk about this, they would translate it as chicken. Because they understand to be chickens to be sacrificial animals. They'll sacrifice animals to some deity, but it's chickens, it's not lambs. They don't have lambs. And I guess most of Africa, whatever. So at least where he's from. So that's what we call an equivalent, a modern equivalent. So it's not what the Greek says, but for the sake of the people, they have a modern equivalent for them to understand, so that they get the meaning of what that is. A sacrificial animal. That's what it's talking about. It doesn't really matter whether it's a lamb or not. It's a sacrificial animal. That's the point of the whole thing, because it's all about sacrificial system. And then in Bible study, they can talk about, well, this was actually a lamb. It's not a chicken.
See, when I was small, I heard a lot of our older people in our community, somebody would say something, they say, well, it sounds like Greek to me. And I was wondering, but if you think about like what you're saying, and probably older pastors use the Greek version for a lot of different things.
Well, that's what we do at seminary.
And if they didn't understand it as people in the community, it sounds like Greek to me. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
But I always wonder why everybody always says it sounds like Greek.
I don't know if it's specifically because of the Bible being in Greek or not, but as far as that cliche or that phrase.
It was like the study of the Bible. Sometimes you don't understand, and you connect it to the Greek. Why they said it sounds like Greek.
Sounds like Portuguese to me.
It sounds like
Yeah.
Italian or
Yeah.
anything else. It was always Greek.
I don't know why they picked the Greek language for that phrase, but it is funny, But you actually know more Greek than you think you do. The word here in Colossians, verse 8, see to it, is one word in Greek, and it is referencing the word that we would say is blink. It sounds in the Greek, the actual Greek word sounds like blink. Well, in English, to blink means to open your eyes. Okay, so see to it. All right, you know a Greek word. I mean, there's a lot of Greek words that you know that you just don't even think about, like blink. A lot of those things come, like lambano is to give or take, to lob. If I lob you a ball, I'm throwing you a ball. That's how I remember the word lambano, is because it's lob, or to ball, to ballo, to throw. Yeah. you have to have all these mnemonic devices, otherwise you just don't remember these things. So, all righty. I'm not a Greek expert. I just remember little pieces of it.